executive of the Demos think tank and a former special advisor to Nick Clegg. Now, there's lots to talk about tonight. I can guess what most of the questions are, but as I always say, if you want to throw in a random one, an ethical question, a moral question, we'd happily have those as well, and a bit of humour at the end if you don't mind.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's start with our first question. It's from James in Hitchin. Hello, James.
Good evening. Have events in the Ukraine led the panel to reevaluate their attitudes to nationalism and national identity?
Why do you think they might have?
Well, a lot of people they're very sort of showing support of the Ukrainian flag, nothing wrong with that, and talking about the importance of borders and sovereign countries. So I wonder if that might be a feature.
OK, Polly Mackenzie.
I think it's a really great question, actually. For me, it has helped me to think through what it means to be a nation state. I think national stories, national identity is absolutely fundamental to any kind of sense of solidarity between individuals. It's why we come together with, shared things like a health service or paying for our roads together. It's why we support each other in times of crisis, as we did through the pandemic. There's that sense of who we are together. I run a think tank called Demos, and I think one of those things that we get wrong about democracy is we think it's government by the people. It's actually government by a people. A demos, a sense of who we are together, about how we get what we want, what we can agree on, not how I get what I want. And I think we've lost that in our understanding of what a demos is. But for me, it's really important for us to say that a demos is not built out of an ethnic identity. What you see with what Russia is doing is the sense that there is a Russianness that comes from blood. That your identity as a Russian is something that is ethnic, that is inalienable, and that therefore the Russians can claim this land of Ukraine as belonging to them, and that the way you build a nation state is out of a people who are united by their ethnicity. I think that's harmful, damaging, and forces us to ask the question of what it takes to build a nation that rejects ethnic identities as part of its national stories, and instead talks about how you build a civic kind of nationalism. We are fighting that battle against Russia, against China, against actually lots of countries that think about religion or kind of ethnic identities. I think we have to be in the West at the forefront of making the case for multi-dimensional, complex national stories built out of civic identities and what we do together, not how we're born.
Tim Stanley.
I think it's a very good question. What I would say is that it has brought home to me the reality of national identity for both good and ill. So here in the West, we've just heard it very brilliantly articulated. We broadly see the nation state as constitutional in nature. It's the product of history. This is not to deracinate it from its history. It's a product of history, but it has become something which can be multicultural, and a group of people who, for all their differences, can be bound together by a constitution or a welfare state or the desire to get things done. And in a way, this then moves up to a supranational level when you get to the EU. So we begin to move beyond borders, and we can be united as Europeans because we have shared values. And then Ukraine happens. And on the one hand, you have the obviously malign behaviour by Russia, whose variety of nationalism is indeed ethnic and language and historically driven, a little bit fantastical, blood and soil, almost neo-Nazi, the desire to reunite all Russian people speaking everywhere. But let's be honest, we also have a flourishing of something surprising, perhaps to us, among the Ukrainians, of a fierce national pride that is willing to die to defend almost the sacred space of their nation. And I think that conflict rises beyond that constitutional definition of democracy. And as I said, it's both good and bad. But I think this conflict has reminded us that it is there, and it's probably there for us too. It's just that living in the splendid isolation of being an island, our own sense of historical nationalism has not been tested. But I suspect it is there.
Do you think that a lot of people in this country have thought about that, though, over the past couple of weeks? Sort of what would our reaction be if, God forbid, the same thing happened to us? Would we react in the same visceral way that Ukraine has?
Yes, I think people have thought about that, and the answer is most definitely they would. I have no doubt about that. And I was very interested in a talk which David Starkey, if I'm allowed to mention David Starkey.
He appears on this programme.
Good. This is a safe space. He gave a talk in which he said much of what I've just said, but then concluded that Britain was not like Ukraine because we had become, I'm sure he'd disagree with this interpretation, but we'd become so decadent that we had lost that sense of solidarity, of national solidarity. I think he's very wrong. Ukraine has found it, despite being itself in many ways, a multicultural, very difficult, imperfect state. It has found it because it's been invaded. The invasion of the outsider pulls people together. That would definitely happen in this country, and I think we saw it during COVID, for good and for ill. There was an illiberal national unity during COVID. There's certain elements of unpleasant illiberalism now in this crisis, but definitely when your back's up against the wall, populations do pull together.
Khalid Mahmood.
Well, very interesting question, Ian. And I think the real issue here is defining ourselves, and particularly on the far left, where we had a huge issue with demonstrating the Union flag and supporting that. And I think that has now clearly been pushed aside. Certainly in terms of Keir Starmer, when he appears now, he has the Union flag behind him, which is the right thing to do. And it shows that we are now united. We are united behind our flag, and it actually means something in terms of our sovereignty. A lot of people talk about sovereignty, but not really understanding what it is. But when a country has been invaded, then you start to understand what sovereignty is and what nationalism is, and proper nationalism, not nationalism in the political sense, but nationalism in the national interest, which is what we're talking about. And that needed to come to us. And I hope in that way, certainly, most of the people who used to have all sorts of attachments to the flag, and as Polly said, in terms of ethnicities and those sort of definitions, we need to move away from that and come together as the United Kingdom, as we are together and one people.
Alexander Stafford.
Well, as I was saying, it's a good question. And I think it's reinforced my own views about the nation state and the primacy of the nation state above all these supranational bodies such as the EU. We as people in Britain are probably never going to have that sort of loyalty, so a supranational body, but we have loyalty and love for our own people who live next door to us. We have nothing to do with them day to day, but we are bound together through shared history and culture and recollection, and even shared way of living as we do now that binds us together. And I think the war in Ukraine shows actually people do come together. But if you look back to Britain back in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, we are a formation as one country, one united country, frankly, because of our wars at the time with the Dutch and the French. That really bound people together across quite a diverse England anyway, to come together. Often we see in adversity, we come together. But one thing it has awakened in myself anyway, talk about my thing, is my grandfather is Ukrainian. And although he came over after the Second World War to the UK, this has sort of almost reawakened some of my own sort of links to Ukraine. Links which I hadn't, my grandfather came over, we hadn't maintained because his family were killed in the Second World War. But it feels more personal to me that really actually my history, my heritage for me and my family is actually really important. And what I see is going on is absolutely devastating.
It's interesting you say that you can't love supranational institutions. Well, in this country, the NHS has become an institution which people say they love. If you look at Twitter, you have the hashtag FBPE people who do love the European Union. So I wonder whether, obviously you could never bring yourself to do that. But I'm not sure I understand that particularly, but people profess to.
There'll always be some people who will love supranational, but we're talking about the body politic as a whole.
Can't imagine anyone loves the WTO, for example.
But you mentioned the NHS, but yes, people love the NHS, and rightly so. But that's also a body, and it's not supranational, but it's on top of our country. It's part of what makes England and Britain, actually. It actually follows those sort of national lines.
As I say, I love a supernatural body, which is the Catholic Church. And well, of course, because I'm a Catholic, and there is a tension between nationalism and my Christianity, which pulls me towards trying to think of the universal. But I think this point about suddenly feeling a bit Ukrainian speaks to how one can have multiple identities and they're not in conflict. One of the problems with nationalism, proper political nationalism, is it demands we make a choice, that you're 100% one thing or the other. But actually one can feel drawn spiritually and ethnically to Israel and be perfectly British. You can feel drawn by your history to Poland Poland and be perfectly British. There is no tension between these things, and throughout our history, people have balanced competing loyalties without feeling that they're being disloyal or cheating on one or the other. The problem with 1930s stuff, nationalism, like Russia's doing, is it tries to compel you to show full loyalty to one identity alone.
I mean, if we wanted to really get into the weeds of this, we could talk about my country, right or wrong, couldn't we? Because, I mean, that was always something that I remember at school doing a debate on that. Sort of, if you were a German in the 1930s and you loved your country, would you have stood up for what your country was doing? I mean, maybe we don't want to go there tonight, but, you know. By the way, Khalid, you have impressed Zach, who says it's so refreshing to hear someone say Union flag rather than Union Jack. So you get a brownie point for that. James, do you want to answer your own question?
I like the idea of the civic national identity and the idea of the national identity for the people. It could be an opportunity to reevaluate it and to get the kind of national identity that is purposeful and healthy. It's just a shame that it took a war to maybe get people thinking about it. But that's something that positive that could come out of it.
James, thank you very much. Now, Luke in Chester has our next question. Go ahead, Luke. Hi.
Evening, Ian. Evening, Paul. Hope you're all well. Obviously, I'm looking at it, sport has a long and prominent history of protest. But given the split we've seen recently with taking the knee, both over here in the US, Novak Djokovic's stance on vaccines, for instance, but also then, and maybe a bit biased here, Ian, the away fans at Chelsea to Burnley, during the Ukrainian support minute of applause. How useful do we feel that human rights gestures of support or even protest are from these sporting bodies of individuals?
Just explain what Chelsea fans did. So
Burnley, along with all the prominent clubs here in England and the UK further, obviously did it was a 1 minute applause, I believe, but then chants of Roman Abramovich. I wouldn't say drowned out the applause, but were very prominent, which were then greeted by some of the loudest boos I've actually heard in a football ground, which was, good to see. But I believe even the manager came out and said it was the wrong place, wrong time. Now, I would personally argue when is the right time to be cheering that on, but we feel that this is just trolling per se, or is this actually political division?
I don't know how many of you are football fans here, but Khalid, I'm going to come to you. Are you Villa or Birmingham?
Rugby.
That's a bit down the road.
Look, again, what we're going down to is these minor issues of heritage of sport, principles of ethnicity, and those sort of issues. I think what we want to be able to be doing in this issue is to look at our nationalist support of where we come from and how we put that together. And I think that's a really important thing. I think, say, from the United Kingdom, we can go to the Commonwealth. I am a citizen of Commonwealth. I'm a citizen of the United Kingdom, and I support both of those identities. The Queen is the head of both of those, and we can do that. But breaking it down into smaller issues, I think is wrong, and I think that doesn't contribute or should be akin to national identity or national security.
But were the Chelsea fans right to do what they did and chant Roman Abramovich's name?
No, I mean, there was a lot of people who did all sorts of wrong things, including people who were taking the knee, booing against them. These are factional issues. These are issues that can all be sorted out with us. But when it comes to our national integrity and our national support, we should be all united in that.
Alexander?
Well, yeah, I think everyone should be united together about what is going on in the Ukraine. I think there's very little in this life now which is black and white. But in this case, in the Ukraine, it is black and white. It is you support a free country, the Ukraine, a democratic country, or you support a dictatorship which is massacring innocent civilians.
But the Chelsea fans weren't supporting Putin. They were supporting the man that they see has transformed them into a great football club.
But I think it's disappointing. I will say it's disappointing that they're trying to imbue sort of sport and their success of their team. I'm not a Chelsea fan myself, in with a conflict which has been so horrific. I mean, we are early days. We need to be very careful about what people say, and actions and words do have consequences.
Who are you a fan of?
I'm more of a rugby fan, but Rother United is one of my local teams.
Oh, yeah. And did you support them before you became the MP?
I've supported many different teams.
Polly?
I don't think we can blame the Chelsea fans for bringing politics to the stadium, because having an act of solidarity in favour of Ukraine is bringing politics into the stadium as well. And, in a free and open society, some people are going to support Russia. And I disagree with those people. I would like to argue with them. I would like to persuade them that they are wrong. But it's in the nature of freedom that it involves people who you find repulsive sometimes, being able to say things and do things that you would rather didn't happen. I think for me, it's that the question is about our institutions, actually, and what role do our institutions have in the leadership of a society. I am disappointed that we have opened up institutions like our newspapers and our football teams to investment, purchasing by a series of oligarchs who have then brought loyalty and basically ill-gotten gains into our national economy, and also into then the leadership of institutions. I want our football teams to be able to think about British politics and the needs of their fans and the needs of the community they serve and winning football matches, not to think about, who's up and who's down in kind of the games of international statesmanship. I think we've just kind of got really wrong, actually, in the way our football is managed. It doesn't belong to the fans. It belongs to big global investors, too much of it in the Premier League. But more broadly, we need to think about actually setting moral and ethical boundaries to who we want the leaders of our country to be.
When you were advising Nick Clegg in government, did you ever come under any influence from oligarchs? Were they even on your radar?
Trying to think. I don't think I've ever met an oligarch. Not.
How convenient.
Yeah, but to be honest, I think I was just not. I remember reading Russell Brand, and he kind of like groped me on the shoulder and sort of like. So I have a distinct memory of that.
I'm sure you would.
Trying to met a lot of house builders. But I never got involved in foreign policy, so I guess that wouldn't have been my thing, and I didn't do fundraising either. So yeah, that's
right, Tim.
All of this sounds like you're describing a sectarian divide. I don't entirely understand. I'm obliged.
Not a football fan, Tim.
I'm obliged by family and faith to support Celtic. Hail, hail. But really, a lot of this you could all be talking in Russian right now, as far as I know. On the regards to the oligarchs thing, the only thing I will say is, listening in the Commons today, I was surprised to hear that apparently Britain has become a tax haven for oligarchs. Why isn't it a tax haven for us? If it can be a tax haven for them, where's our tax haven?
Because we haven't got billions, I suppose.
Well, that's peculiar, isn't it? How come you can have reasonable taxes for them, but we all get hit?
Well, because we imagined that they would come here and spend money, and therefore,
right.
Trickle-down economics and everything. We all get rich off oligarch wives buying lots of Louis Vuitton handbags.
And I'm not against people coming here and spending money.
Not that I want to stereotype.
I'm not against people coming here and spending money. I want as open as an economy as possible. In the same way that if someone wants to kneel before a football game, that's fine. If someone wants to boo them, that's inevitable. These actions might be right or wrong. For me, the key point is the state should stay out of it and not try to regulate speech.
Well, it's been a great start to the programme. Thank you all for your answers so far. We'll have more in just a moment. It's 8:20.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
With me on the panel today are Polly Mackenzie, Chief Executive of the Demos think tank, Tim Stanley, Telegraph columnist and historian. What's your latest book, Tim?
Oh, it's called Whatever Happened to Tradition. It's coming out in paperback in the autumn.
That's a bit too advanced for us. But...
Are you going to publicise my latest pamphlet?
What's your latest pamphlet?
Making Democracy Work, Iain.
That sounds very exciting.
It is. It's really good.
Yes, you must come on and talk about it sometime.
I'd be delighted.
Alexander Stafford is Conservative MP for Rother Valley and Khalid Mahmood is Labour MP for Birmingham Perry-Barr. Haven't you got a report out that you've written for Policy Exchange?
Yes, it's about the Trojan horse affair and looking at some of the people trying to manipulate their religious beliefs and saying that this is actually for all the Muslims and really trying to manipulate the community as well. They've been found out. They were found out in 2014, but they've decided to the New York Times to an 8-hour boring podcast, which I had to listen to every minute.
8 hours? That's longer than For the Many.
It
You
is.
should have just read the transcript. That would have been quicker.
Well, I wanted to listen to, because listening to it actually is different to actually reading it, because you actually hear their voices and the way that they're actually conniving in some of it, which is absolutely very sinister, the way the thing's being done. But so, yes, in relation to that.
You see, that would make an interesting phone-in. Yours, possibly less so.
Hey! I've got deep political theory and some jokes. There's a whole bit about a mouldy orange.
No, we like jokes. But we're not going to have a joke now, because we're going to go to Jenny in Exeter, who's got a very serious question. Hello, Jenny.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, so I was just wondering what the panel thought about how decisions or missteps by American presidents over the past 20 years have enabled the rise of Putin's extremism. And understanding, of course, that this invasion is totally, absolutely unjustifiable, but just looking at, American policy and decisions over the past 20 years, how that might have impacted on what's happening.
We've got some really classy questions tonight, aren't we, Tim?
The problem is that...
Anyone think we're Radio 4?
The problem is better than that.
Yes, quite.
Actually, no, Radio 4 is very good. I'm on it all the time. The problem is that America has had a slightly confused and muddled policy, because on the one hand, it has rightly tried to pivot towards East Asia in order to contain China and also to develop trade in that region. On the other hand, it is also committed, of course, by history to what's going on in Europe, which means it's also done things such as discussing the possibility of Ukraine maybe entering NATO at some point, something administrations have left open, but at the same time actually been quite reluctant to properly endorse. The same goes with things like the supplying of military aid. Barack Obama would not supply lethal aid, but Donald Trump famously is accused of holding it up in order to try to get dirt on the Bidens out of Zelensky. So in other words, the point is that the policy has been confused because America has been stretched between two hemispheres. What it would like and has wanted for a very long time is the Europeans to pay for their own defence and to handle this region of the world. It's not got it. Maybe that will change because the Europeans have been so spooked by the invasion that they will finally not only hit the NATO 2% commitment but go further.
Alexander.
Well, frankly, I think hugely. I think ever since George W. Bush, America has taken a huge step back from the international stage. It's trying and failing, I'd say, to control, frankly, all these nutters, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iran, whether it's Putin, whether it's China, these people with terrorist or weapons, nuclear weapons, and they're allowing them to grow in trying to appease them. And actually, I think a bit more robust foreign policy across both parties in America would have actually kept people like Putin a bit more in the box.
About 6 years ago, I pulled up Nick Clegg for using the word nutter in an interview because mine say that it's not a word that should be used in polite society now for...
Okay, I'll call Putin a fascist dictator who's clearly absolutely...
we could argue with that, could we? Molly.
So I think it was right after the Cold War to try and welcome Russia into the kind of family of free nations, try and integrate our economies, like... PwC and KPMG have recently closed down their offices or severed links with their offices, and they were the kind of companies that advanced into Russia. And what we failed to do is set boundaries around what it means to be in that family of nations. And it's clear that Putin and China's leadership think of democracy as essentially a weak form of government. And slowly, incrementally, they have started to see that opening up and the end of the USSR as a historic failing of Russian power and Russian supremacy. And they've tried to test the boundaries. And at every stage, whether it is Syria, chemical attacks, Georgia, the annexation of Crimea, the West has gone, don't do that. And then that's it. Threatened, actively threatened, and then done absolutely nothing to punish Russia. And they have absolutely been reinforced in their view that in the end, we're weak and feeble and we don't have the democratic will to fight. And in the end, if you're not willing to use coercive power, then they will trample all over you. And Ukraine has been, I think, the victim of, as Jenny says, 20 years of mistakes, an unwillingness to say that because we would like to welcome the Russian people into an open and free society, an economic sharing and integration that could benefit all of us, that we therefore just turn a blind eye to unacceptable breaches of international law.
I think there's been a big confusion in policy, whereas America's thought that capitalism goes hand in hand with democracy. And just because McDonald's has gone to China and has gone to Russia means that actually democracy will flow. And we've seen that with China. Just because capitalism flows doesn't mean democracy will flow. And that is the big failing. And actually, the countries like Russia and China have uncoupled capitalism and democracy. So they've got the capitalism often, but not the democracy.
Khalid.
Look, Sue, I think what Polly said, and I just want to continue on from that very quickly, is the issue that we took our eye off the ball, particularly with George W. coming in, concentrating in the Middle East and those sort of issues that he was bothered about. Everybody left Russia alone. So have we. We've decimated our armed forces. We're not in a position to actually really do anything at the moment, defense-wise. We need to really put that back up. And 16 billion last year really doesn't even fill the gap in relation to that. But consecutive presidents in the US, George W. Obama really for 8 years didn't do anything and had no focus internationally at all, allowed Russia to carry on. We got then Mr. Trump, who God knows where his policies were, particularly very close to Russia, allowed them to carry on doing what he's doing. And now you got Mr. Biden, let's hope he sticks to what he's doing at the moment. But there's been a real weakness in American attention to particularly Russia and China to an extent, but I think they need to bring that back up again.
Right, we'll take more of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060973. Jenny, thank you very much for your call. It's 8:31. Sabrina Farrow is here with the LBC News headlines.
Michael Gove has told LBC the invasion of Ukraine shows President Putin will stop at almost nothing. Speaking exclusively to Tonight with Andrew Marr, the Levelling Up Secretary says the UK needs to be conscious that Russia has a different military doctrine to our country, which makes the situation complicated. Boris Johnson's announced a further £175 million to help people in Ukraine. The Prime Minister also defended the government's refugee policy, saying the UK will be as generous as possible, but he's refused to ease visa requirements for people seeking safety in Britain. And tests have shown Shane Warne died of natural causes after being found at his villa in Thailand on Friday. It's thought the cricketer had a heart attack. LBC weather dry this evening, clear but windy later on tonight, with a low of -2 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:35, we have Alexander Stafford with us, Conservative MP, Khalid Mahmood, Labour MP, Tim Stanley, not an MP, but Telegraph columnist, far more important, and Polly Mackenzie, Chief Executive of the Demos think tank. They're taking your calls, and our next one is a text, actually, from Julie in Suffolk. Are we guilty of treating Ukrainian refugees differently to those from other countries? Khalid?
No, we're not. We only allowed 50 through the weekend. It's absolutely appalling after all the commitments that we've made to say these are our European brethren and we're going to allow them to come through, and people are stuck, as we see regularly on the news. And I think our Home Office is incapable of doing anything right, and there has to be a wholesale change in order to deal with this, whether we're stopping people deliberately coming in or whether they're allowing people to come in. In both instances, it doesn't work and hasn't worked.
But we've been saying this since John Reid described the Home Office as not fit for purpose back in 2006. I mean, what have you MPs done to hold the Home Office to account and make sure that it does function properly?
Well, at the moment in opposition, when John Reid was in position, we actually tried to work with John, certainly to do some of those issues, and we were pushing in some way forward. We had a lot more staff, for instance. Border agency was 50% higher than when Mrs. May came in and cut that down. So when you have lesser amount of people actually trying to do the work that you're supposed to do, then it makes it extremely difficult for them to do that. So those are the issues, and I've called on many occasions for the staff to be back to the levels that it was, because if you don't have the actual physical staff, computers can do so much, but you actually need the people to be actually doing that real work, and that isn't available.
Tim?
The guiding principle of Priti Patel's approach to immigration is that it should be managed. So you shut down the illegal routes, like channel crossings, but at the same time you open up legal routes. Now the problem is twofold. One is that the illegal routes are still clearly functioning. The other is campaigners keep saying the legal routes are not working. And this is an example of that. So there's this real tension between what she says at the dispatch box, where she insists the system is bespoke, it is working so well, it is up and running, we are getting it done. And then story after story, not just the low figure of 50, but people saying things like, look, I've got people who ring me, say that their aunt has turned up in Paris, where they've been told to go, or they've gone to Calais, and apparently there's just a poster on the wall that says, please go to Paris or Brussels. This is madness. Priti Patel it does keep coming back to the point that we shouldn't expect that everyone will come to Britain. I think we're going through a period right now where British people want to help, and the most obvious thing to do is to take refugees, but actually the vast majority of Ukrainians will, for the moment, settle in the countries around Ukraine and, of course, wish to go back. But clearly that number is very low. Clearly the legal route is not functioning properly, and the more that the government insists it's up and running, the more it's going to embarrass itself, because people can tangibly, materially see that her design for immigration, I don't know if it's her fault or the bureaucrats' fault, is not actually functioning the way she says it should.
Polly?
I think, what we've heard about the sort of shambolic, dysfunctional and tiny system we've got to help Ukrainian refugees thus far is right, and it is out of step with, I think, what the public want. But I think perhaps what Julie was trying to get at in her message was the question as to whether the outpouring of love and compassion and support that we've seen among the British people is somehow different from what we have seen with respect, for example, to Syrian refugees or Iraqi refugees. And I think it's really important for us to think about that. Because, when we see those images of queues, for example, of refugees waiting under a bridge trying to escape under onslaught, I think of the queues that we saw in the Leave campaign's posters of Syrian refugees queuing to get into Turkey.
It wasn't the Leave campaign's poster, it was Nigel Farage's Leave.eu poster.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for the correction. But an image of refugees being used deliberately to portray a threat, not to trigger an emotional response of compassion. And I think there are some really good reasons why the response in Ukraine is not just, oh, we're racist, we only care about white people dying in wars. That's not true. There is something materially different here, which is the invasion of a sovereign nation by another nation without provocation. That's quite different from many of the wars that we see in the Middle East, which are provoked, supported by outside powers, but nevertheless stem from internal repression, civil wars. So it's much easier to figure out exactly where we might stand, actually, on the complex issues that always surround conflict here. But I think it is important for us not to settle for going, actually, seeing civilised people evicted from their middle-class homes makes me finally think that refugees are worth looking after. But instead think, actually, perhaps I do have a stronger emotional response to refugees who look and feel and sound a bit like me. And what I should do is use that as a lever for my own compassion, to think about how it's possible for me to understand better the realities and the lives of those disrupted in wars whose lives were more different from ours. We don't need to feel guilty about the mistakes that we've made in the past, but we should use this, I think, again, as a lever to improve our own compassion for those we perhaps didn't understand and did feel threatened by when they too were simply fleeing for their lives.
Let's just remind ourselves of the question. Are we guilty of treating Ukrainian refugees differently to those from other countries? Alexander Stafford.
I don't think we're guilty at all. If you look what happened in Afghanistan last year, we took a large number of immigrants, of asylum seekers, refugees from that crisis. We're starting to do the same in the Ukraine. They are going through the same checks, and that's one of the sticking points, let's be honest, because they are all being checked. We're not just opening the borders to all the immigrants.
Why, when everybody else is? Every other country is just saying, if you've got a Ukrainian passport, we will let you in and ask questions later.
The EU already, before the conflict, already had visa-free access to Ukrainians.
Ireland didn't, and they have waived those rules.
And we need to obviously keep checks and check on people coming. I agree, it needs to go quicker. And we've already said we're going to have probably up to 200,000 people through one route alone, uncapped another route. We need to process it. The most important thing at the moment is getting people, frankly,
out. We need to get people to safety, not process them.
I completely agree. We need to get them out of the country.
It's a kind of bureaucratic nightmare.
But that's exactly right. We need to get them out of the country. We need to get them out of the country.
That's not happening.
But we need to check on who's actually coming and where they're going. Get them out of the country first, and then help with running. But another one thing, but we've also got to put this in context of our wider help. Our help for Ukraine is not just helping people with the refugees, it's also, frankly, arming the military. About 10% of the entire Ukrainian army has been trained by the British Army. We have sent them 2,000 anti-tank weapons. Those are tools being used on the ground as we speak to actually defend the country and help them and stop this crisis. And that is something other support which we are giving to the Ukraine, which I think is really good.
Well, the Prime Minister said we will lift all barriers and allow people to come through, as Boris does in his impeccable way of saying, making large statements. It's not happening. It's not coming through. The fact we're providing support, and we have provided military support for Ukraine, is good, but that doesn't mean we should let the ball down on the other side. Both are equally important, particularly those people who are literally in the threat of losing everything they have. And there are our European brothers and sisters, and we need to show that we do that. What more we need than an identification that they're Ukrainian, and you can make notes of that, and you can follow that through once the system comes in. People who need support, when they come into the country, they're not going to run off and they're not going to hide. Most of them will want to go back because that's where the families are. So we should really now start to think properly, and Priti Patel needs to open those doors.
Okay, Julie, thanks very much for your text. Let's go to Scott in Inverness. Hi, Scott.
That's all the side, right? I'll be 5 minutes.
Yeah, you're on the radio, Scott.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear, yes, we can. What would you like to ask?
So, realistically, how high do you think the fuel prices are going to go? They're £1.58 where I'm living just now.
Well, where I live, it's £1.64. So you're very lucky, Scott, in that sense. Alexander, how high do you think they're going to go?
Well, hopefully not too much higher. We're obviously having a massive crisis with gas and with oil, which has been exacerbated, obviously, by invasion of. We don't know what's going on, but that's why we need to get our own homegrown energy sources up and running and better as quickly as possible. And frankly, we need to have more renewables so we're not reliant on the international gas or oil markets.
Well, renewables are never going to take over from gas and oil, are they? Again,
if you include nuclear, they will.
Should this not have been seen in advance?
Well, yeah, and that's why we're already about 30% of our energy is produced from renewables, and it's going to go higher and higher. And that's exactly what we want. We want to stop buying oil from the Saudis. We want to stop getting oil and gas from the Russians. We don't want that. And in fact, only 3% of our gas comes from Russia, compared to like 30% in Germany. Leaves us in a far better position than other countries. We want our own energy security.
Well, it does, but shouldn't we now be opening up new oil and gas fields in the North Sea? We have the energy there. Why not use it?
Well, as the Prime Minister said today, we need to look at, we're going through transition, we're not getting rid of all oil and gas, but we need to, frankly, wean ourselves off something which fluctuates with price and actually leaves us vulnerable to these sort of regimes.
Holly?
It's a long-term strategy for us to move to renewables, and Alex is completely right about that. And when it comes to our cars, we need to be moving them to electric vehicles. There's some role for hydrogen in particular in terms of larger vehicles, but obviously none of that can happen immediately overnight. I don't think that basically screwing ourselves up for the long term on the climate is going to do us much good. But this is going to be really, really difficult. I think actually the government is going to need to think about how it can support people through the financial difficulties of this energy price surge. And at the moment, I think the response through our welfare system has been woefully inadequate. Even if we start pumping more oil in the North Sea, the reality is it's not going to affect the global price. The prices of this are set. And the reality of the financial pain people are going to experience is basically it's baked in, and the only way it's going to go is worse.
George says, I'd love to know what this Tory MP thinks of his former employers still buying Russian crude oil. I don't know who's your
Yeah, so I used to work in the environment sector. I worked for the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and then I moved to Shell to work on the future of oil.
Yes. Buying oil.
So I stopped working with them years ago, so I don't know what they're buying. Frankly, I don't think anyone should be buying products from Russia if you can avoid it. Whether it's McDonald's, whether you should try and support the people in Ukraine by not buying those stuff.
Do you support British dockers who are refusing to unload ships with Russian products on them?
Yes, I think it's a good thing. We need to put as much pressure on Ukraine, on Russia to protect the Ukraine. Yeah, great. More boycotts, the better on that.
Right, you two have got a few minutes to think about your answers on this one because it's 8:46.
Tonight with Andrew Marr, only on LBC.
This year, the spring of 2022, is this a kind of hinge of history moment, Michael Gove?
Oh, undoubtedly. You can't contemplate the land invasion of one European country by another with the biggest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War without thinking that this is a hinge moment. It is undoubtedly the biggest foreign policy and economic event that we've seen at least since 9/11.
Tonight with Andrew Marr returns tomorrow from 6 p.m. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. question with Iain Dale on LBC.
10 to 8, Alexander Stafford, Khalid Mahmood, Tim Stanley and Polly Mackenzie with us taking your calls. We're in the middle of answering a question, actually. It's from Scott in Inverness, who says, realistically, how high do you think prices at the fuel pumps could go? Are you a betting man, Tim?
I wouldn't. I fear it's going to go very, very high, and that's going to particularly hit old people on fixed incomes. My mother has seen her gas bills double, and it's impoverishing. Quite simply. It was said just before the break that the problem with non-renewables is the price fluctuates. Well, the problem with renewables is that the supply fluctuates if the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. It has been said that we need to switch from those dirty petrol cars to electric ones. Maybe we do, but then you've got right.
So I'm feeling very smug at the moment.
But it runs on electricity, which is provided for by a power station.
Still cheaper.
So this is the problem, is we are going through a period of transition, yes. But what happens if you're going through a period of transition and supply is restrained or the price goes up or you go to war with the world's such an enormous producers such as Russia? You don't have suddenly the non-renewables to support the transition to green. Ergo, logically, normally in a marketplace, you would produce more of those non-renewables. But we have established that as almost a religious heresy to say we need at this point in time to actually produce a little bit more. Well, I suspect we're going to end up doing that. And it'll come from things like gas fields in the North Sea. Because at some point, the consumer is going to say to the government, why are you actually impoverishing me? For a good cause, but why are you actually taking policies and steps which make me poorer?
And they'll probably be saying that around October 2023 or June 2024, won't they, when there's an election coming up. And that and any politician worth their salt is going to recognise that now and think, OK, how can we mitigate that? Khalid?
Yeah. First of all, I think what we've done is far more extreme than what the French and everybody else has done. Having taken no more than 3% of gas from Russia, we should be far more reliant on our own existing supplies that we have. But yet we've had the bigger increase than what France and everybody else has had. And so that's a political issue the government should have sorted out with the companies and haven't done. I've got my constituents, particularly even small businesses, who are having their gas prices raised 3 times more than they were paying just a month ago. It's absolutely ridiculous for them to carry on in some of them in terms of business. But what we've got to look at is particularly what the industry is doing around at the moment in developing what they're developing. Rolls-Royce have just developed new, very small, very efficient nuclear generators, which will power 1 million households with a very small generator which you can place in a city, which has been funded by Qatar, not by us.
Well, I think the government announced today they're putting £210 million.
Yeah, that's right. Because Qatar's put a lot more money in. We should have put some more money in as well, looking at that. Renewables are fine. But I think ultimately, if we're going to be realistic, I'm an engineer. I don't think we'll get to a level without wrecking all of our natural heritage. So it's going to be a payoff between what we do in terms of trying to get the tribunals, our sites, our beautiful heritage countryside. If you want to do that, then you have to play a balance of trying to do that. But the reality is we need to get nuclear much safer, much more prominent, and engineer it properly, and let's get on with it and do the job.
Right, Scott, how high do you think it's going to go? I think it's going to near £2 a gallon.
Yeah.
Within a very short time.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, £2 a litre.
Yeah, that would have been pretty unthinkable before, to be honest. I think it'll be eye-watering if it does go to that, but I agree with you, and I think it probably could go up to about £2 a litre, which is pretty astonishing, to be honest.
So my car would cost £220 to fill up if it gets to £2 a litre.
I thought you just bought an electric one.
Well, I have. But
don't put petrol in it, Iain.
I've still got my old one because I don't trust the electric one to get me long distances. I'll get over that one day. Scott, thank you very much indeed. Joe in Northwood says, really good panel on cross questions tonight. Watching on Global Player. Panel very smart, especially Khalid on Ukraine and wearing the colours. You kind of are, aren't you? I haven't noticed that. Like Tim Stanley very much too. You two don't get a mention, I'm afraid. But,
try harder next time.
Yeah, exactly. Right, Davida is in Preston. Hello, Davida.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Was it the right decision to take RT off air in the UK on Freeview and satellite?
And that was a decision effectively provoked by the European Union. It wasn't a decision that either Ofcom or our government took. Was it the right thing for the EU to effectively ban Russia today? Because, I mean, it's quite complicated how it all happened, but that's what they've effectively done. Alexander?
I think overall, yes. But let's be honest, who actually watches Russia Today in the UK? It's one of those such smaller things.
Weirdos.
It sends a symbol. I don't think, frankly, it was much material good. And obviously there's pressure on the BBC, obviously now withdrawing from Russia. But I think it sends a good sign. But does it make any practical difference?
Does it send a good sign, though? Because Boris Johnson said, look, we're not really in the business of censoring TV channels. I mean, they have to comply with Ofcom standards, and obviously there were 27 different Ofcom investigations underway. But the EU effectively took the decision out of the British government's hands, which I suspect they're quite happy with.
Well, as we said, I think no one actually watched Russia Today until the invasion to see what sort of madness was actually on it. And when people started sort of tuning in, and, oh, God, this is absolutely crazy. And they said, OK, this shouldn't be on air. It's just completely sort of false information.
Holly?
I think it probably was right to take it off, but as Alex says, the idea that then stems the flow of misinformation is a bit naive, actually. It's clear that Russia has been very strategically investing huge amounts of money in disrupting our information economy. And often that's kind of put forward as a sort of simple thing of like, oh, they're on the side of UKIP and the right wing. It's actually not that simple. We've done quite a lot of work at Demos actually analysing the tactics of Russia's Internet Research Agency, for example. And it's actually what they want to do is disrupt the conception that there is a truth. They want to foment dissent between groups. And so they will, in fact, agitate to support all sorts of extremist narratives. They're not trying to push pro-Russia propaganda. Russia Today is a lot of the time. But actually, I think much more insidious is the way that Russian investment is manipulating the algorithms on our social media and fomenting extremism, essentially funding extremism, funding people, influencers to push further and further to the extremes. And that harms actually the sense that there's the possibility of consensus, and harms the sense that, in fact, there are such things as the truth.
Now, if you're very quick, you two, we could get another question in on cabinet reshuffle. Tim?
No, it's a bad idea, both for free speech reasons, because it gives your opponent an argument about equivalence. So at the same time as Putin is shutting down foreign news stations, he will be able to say, well, the European Union's done that to us. But thirdly, I like to know what the other side thinks. I took a look at the website today. I took a look at the Russia Today website. You get a funny thing that appears on your screen when you do that. It says it's checking your server. I don't know if that means the MI5 are taking a look at me. But I don't hear the Russian disinformation anymore. You can't get it. And I want to know what it is they're claiming. As a journalist, I'm just curious to know. So, no, I think it's a very, very bad idea.
Khalid?
I agree with Tim, and I think BBC should still continue to broadcast it in Russia.
Well, it can't if the Russians stop it.
Yeah, but we should still try to put signals out if we can.
Well, yeah, and I think they are actually doing that. Right, very quick answer from you on this. David is in Victoria. David, what would you like to ask?
I mean, I haven't been left much time, but basically I think it's time for a cabinet reshuffle. I don't think the best people are in the best jobs within the Tory party.
Okay, for each of you, one person you'd like to sack from the cabinet and one person you'd like to bring into the cabinet. Khalid?
Get rid of Priti Patel. I don't know who'd come in.
You're supposed to say Keir Starmer. Tim?
Right.
There are better people? I didn't... I think actually it's a very unjournalistic thing to do, but actually I think they've all kind of raised their game in the last few months, and some of them have emerged as stars, like Liz Truss and Ben Wallace. So I don't think it's the time for a reshuffle.
Okay.
Yeah, I think moving people in general causes more harm than good in the teeth of a crisis, even though there are better people for most of those jobs. The exception is Priti Patel, and I don't know, but I don't know. Jeremy Hunt, it's not really his thing, but it ought to be rewarded for basically being a good egg and deeply competent as chair of the Health Committee.
So, Alexander, who would you like to sack?
I think they're all doing a great job. And as I already mentioned, they have stepped up over the last couple of weeks. The Prime Minister's done a great job the last couple of weeks. And we've got lots of talent in the junior ministerial ranks. But, let's wait and see.
Any tips?
I think James Cleverly and the Foreign Office is doing a great job, so let's see where he goes in the future.
Right, final text question. This is from Tina in Birmingham. A Just Eat food delivery cyclist has been spotted cycling up the M6 northbound near Birmingham Spaghetti Junction. If it was your food he was delivering, what would it be? Alexander.
Some sort of like burger or some sort of like honest burgers and the like.
Okay.
Curry every time, especially in Birmingham. Nice Balti.
From the Balti Square, but he's got misdirection. He's gone to Walsall.
Yeah, it's a bit odd, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
Go on, what would you like him to deliver to you?
A nice Balti from the Curry Triangle in Birmingham.
Oh, you two can go out for
Absolutely, anytime.
Tim, are you a Balti kind of person?
No, I'd go for a pudding. I believe that England's one undisputed contribution to civilization is its puddings.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I love working in Parliament, actually. Fantastic puddings for about 60 pence.
I sense a spotted dick joke coming. Or not. Thank you very much to you all for joining us this evening on Cross Question. Alexander Stafford, Polly Mackenzie, Tim Stanley and Khalid Mahmood. We will, of course, be back with another edition tomorrow. You can catch up on Global Player or on YouTube. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about the Economic Crime Bill, which is a lot more interesting than it sounds, I can assure you. Don't go anywhere. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Michael Gove has told LBC the UK should do everything possible to help Ukraine. Speaking exclusively to Tonight with Andrew Marr, the Levelling Up Secretary says